ดี๋ยวเราเริ่มเช้าวันนี้นะคะด้วยเรื่องราวนะคะในหัวข้อของคุณสตีฟสักนิดหนึ่งนะคะสำหรับหัวข้อนี้เนี่ยมีชื่อว่า Library Management in Disruptive Times Skill and Knowledge for an Uncertain Future ค่ะคุณสตีฟ โอคอนเนอร์เนี่ยนะคะท่านเป็นศาสตราจารย์วุฒิคุณจากมหาวิทยาลัยชาร์ลส์ สจ๊วตค่ะแล้วก็ยังเป็นบรรณาธิการวารสาร Library Management ด้วยซึ่งวารสารนี้เนี่ยเป็นวารสารวิชาการออนไลน์สำหรับวงการห้องสมุดแล้วก็บริการสารสนเทศที่มียอดดาวน์โหลดบทความเฉลี่ยถึงเดือนละมากกว่า 12,000 ครั้งเลยนะคะแล้วก็เป็นผู้เขียนแล้วก็ยังเป็นบรรณาธิการหนังสือเรื่อง Library Management in Disruptive Times ด้วยซึ่งท่านก็ยังเชี่ยวชาญในเรื่องของการใช้เครื่องมือที่เขาเรียกกันว่า scenario planning เป็นเครื่องมือที่เราใช้ในการฝึกคิดแล้วก็วิเคราะห์คาดการณ์ความเปลี่ยนแปลงในอนาคตค่ะที่จะมีผลกระทบต่อห้องสมุดจนสามารถนำมาเขียนเป็นหนังสือเรื่อง Imagine Your Library's Future ซึ่งตอนนี้เนี่ยมีการแปลแล้วก็ตีพิมพ์เป็นภาษาจีนเรียบร้อยแล้วนะคะ Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to welcome our first speaker, Mr. Steve O'Connor.
Good morning. Sawadee-ka, Sawadee-ka. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very honoured to be back in Bangkok and to be able to speak at this forum. I certainly would like to thank the President for his very kind welcome and also to the organisers of this conference. They've done a fantastic job, I think, getting this conference happening and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here. I would also like to congratulate the TK Park organisation on their library and everything that they've attempted to do there. I think it's very impressive and certainly at a very high international standard. I come to you today trying to change my slides. And when I learned that, there we go. I come to you with particular experience, and I think I've always enjoyed coming to Thailand, and I've come here many, many times and have friends here in Bangkok, Hua Hin, Chiang Mai. And so I have a lot of knowledge and a lot of respect, I think, for the Thai people and the Thai culture. I've worked as a university librarian in Australia, but in the last 5 years I've worked in Hong Kong, a neighbour, and I've been able to gather and research information on the whole environment across Asia. So I'm very appreciative of that. But I'm also very appreciative of the kind of change we have in our society and the way in which everything floods past us. This is an image of my home back in Australia and the flood which is happening at that particular time. You can see the waters have risen and the waters are flowing very quickly. It's analogous, I think, to the fact that so much change is happening in our society and in our library world. And indeed, things got worse. The floods have got higher. And I think that is also happening as we look at what's happening in our library environment. So I think the flood waters are a metaphor, if you like, for what is happening to us. I've published a few books because it seemed to me from the experience that I had dealing with scenario planning, it was worthwhile trying to communicate that to as many people as I could. Because scenario planning, as we ran in a workshop yesterday, gives us a bit of an approach, a bit of pause to think about what is happening to us and to our particular libraries. I was also concerned about the library management and in these disruptive times. And so if we talk about those floodwaters being the floodwaters of disruption, then how do we manage effectively in those times, in those floods? And so I wrote that particular book. And I'm just publishing another book on repositories, because the print book is said to be obsolete, but I don't believe it is. And I believe it's very, very important that we do keep those books in proper repositories. If you happen to read Chinese, you can read the first book in Chinese. They asked me whether I would like to proof it, and I said, no, I'm quite happy. I can't read Chinese. This quotation is a good point to start from. It says that nearly half of the jobs in our marketplace are at high risk of digital disruption in the next 20 years. I don't think it's going to be 20 years at all. It is happening now, and is certainly going to happen very much more over the next 3 to 5 years. This young man is related to me, but I put him up there because I think we've got to be thinking about our libraries in terms of organising them, presenting them for people of that age. We don't organise them for ourselves and how we think about libraries, but we want to think about them in terms of how young people will come to our libraries. Because this is a very astounding quotation. It says that 65%, well over half, of children entering primary school today will end up working in roles that do not yet exist. When I started in libraries, I knew what a librarian was. And the library role was changing, but it was changing very slowly. But things are changing much more quickly now. Those floodwaters are flooding past us very much more quickly. So when you are training to be a librarian, you are training for a role which may be very different in a very short space of time. And it is changing because of disruption by digital disruption. It's very, very influential. Is this young man going to be the future librarian? I wondered whether he was taking the books off the shelf or whether he was putting them back on. I don't think he really knew. But the role of the future librarian is going to be very different. It's going to be very different to what we have now, and certainly what we have had now is very different to what it was 3 years ago. And our education programs are working very hard to keep up with that. And as a result, I think it's critical that we all engage in continuous education. So if we were to talk about disruption, it's worthwhile talking about some examples. You would all remember IBM. IBM, the big computer company. And they produced very large mainframe computers. And their business model was to have the mainframe computer, and everybody would have dumb computers linked up to that mainframe computer. And they were so confident of their business model that they did not see or understand that the personal computer, the little personal computer, was being invented and was becoming very, very popular. The personal computer became the Macintosh computer and the many different types of personal computers you can get today, as well as the iPad and the tablet. So we all have our own personal devices. And of course that changed the way in which IBM did its business. IBM's business model became disrupted. It became redundant. it became obsolete. It failed in many ways. If you had had a business producing diaries, paper diaries, or paper contact address books, you would have been very concerned at the advent of the digital environment. If you had been watching the program effectively, you would have noticed that digital disruption was happening. But if you hadn't, your diary business would have been disrupted by this little beast here, the smart computer, or the iPhone in my case. But this phone has really disrupted those businesses. And so if you had a diary business or an address book business, your business would have gone down very, very significantly. And it's really disrupted by that mobile phone. Do you all remember Kodak? Who remembers Kodak? Do you know which company went bankrupt last year? It was Kodak. And Kodak were a business who were very happy, very content in their business model. Kodak could make cameras, they could make film, they could make paper for printing, they could process your film, your slides, whatever. And they could actually translate them, and they had the whole business model tied up nice and tightly. They were very comfortable because they knew everything about photography. Can anybody tell me who actually invented digital photography? I can't see you anyway with all these lights. But the company which invented digital photography was actually Kodak. But Kodak looked at digital photography and they looked at what they were doing and they thought, we're doing very well, thank you. We've got the whole business tied up. Digital photography will never work. And so they discarded it. But a number of other smaller companies, they thought digital photography will work. And so eventually, digital photography is in all the cameras we saw this morning and the one operating here now, but particularly it's got into the mobile phone and getting very much more powerful. And that's because Kodak said, we don't want it. We don't think it's going to work. But this little camera in this mobile phone disrupted the whole business model for Kodak. And so their business went down, 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 down. And eventually they went out of business, they became bankrupt. And that was because they closed their eyes. They closed their eyes to what was happening around them. And they didn't understand what digital photography was. Kodak are not the only ones to be affected by digital photography or digital disruption. You know that bookshops are doing okay now, but they certainly have been affected by organisations like Amazon and Digital Depository. They've been disrupted by them because Amazon and Digital Depository can deliver digitally. They deliver it to your mobile phone or to your laptop. You can search for the information you want, the book, you can order it online, and it's delivered to your home, either in digital form or in paper form. So again, digital is disrupting a major industry in terms of bookshops. Hotels said, well, we are not affected by this. We just rent out rooms. We provide beds for the evening. We provide an accommodation for people who are travelling. But now we find that hotels, their business model is being disrupted by Airbnb. And if you've ever used Airbnb, it's very, very convenient. It's very prolific, but you look at the offerings online and then you can make your choices online, and then you can order, make your bookings, and I'm sure you, as I, have used Airbnb very successfully. Taxis. Taxis thought, well, what could digital disruption have for us? But of course it has. It's had a huge implication. And Uber and other varieties of Uber, particularly in China, have arisen, and they have actually set up systems which are competing with the taxi business. Perhaps in Bangkok, the tuk-tuks have disrupted the taxi business, or the taxi business has disrupted the tuk-tuk business. I'm not quite sure which. If you have seen a book by Richard Watson, he wrote about the future. I don't predict the future. I try to get people to think about ways and means of thinking about the future. But Richard Watson had this extinction timeline. And if you can read that, I think you're doing very, very well. So let me help you. What he was talking about was a variety of issues and services in our society today, and trying to say, well, whether these would be extinct or whether these would be available in a number of years' time. In this extinction timeline, he said that in 2018, the year in which we've now arrived at, libraries, Blackberries, video rental stores, and post offices would be extinct. I know that he has since changed his mind about libraries, but it's worthwhile thinking about, isn't it? Because if you look at video rental stores, if you had 100,000 baht, would you invest that money in a video rental store today? I don't think so. And the reason you wouldn't invest in a video rental store is that the DVD itself is becoming redundant, isn't it? Because how are the videos and movies being delivered? But in digital form. And so that whole business model of the video rental store is disappearing. They are still there to some extent, but certainly nowhere near as strong as what they were 3 to 5 years ago. In Australia, I'm more experienced in terms of post offices. Post offices used to deliver letters. You could go and buy your stamp and the letters would be delivered. Not many people use letters anymore. How do they communicate with each other? Email. So they send messages to each other via email, by WhatsApp, by various messaging systems. And so the business of the post office, for the most part, has been disrupted, and they're looking for other types of businesses and types of revenue generation in order to be able to stay alive. I'd like you to hang on to the idea that libraries may be extinct, because it always gets me thinking, well, perhaps I'm missing something here. I believe in libraries, I believe in the power of libraries, but I want to make sure that they are relevant and that they are achieving what they're meant to achieve. He also predicted, he's lost the prediction, there it is, that in 2020, the copyright would be extinct. And you think, well, that can't be the case. It's a law in all our countries. And so copyright says, if I remember, that an item is held under copyright for my lifetime plus 80 years. I think in Thailand it's 60 years at the moment, but internationally it's 80 years. But what if Richard Watson were right? What if copyright were extinct? What if it was no longer relevant to what you were doing? Because at the moment, copyright restricts what a library can do a great deal. But if you were to think about that and you thought, copyright were no longer there, what could I do? And I think you would begin to think many different thoughts. You would have many what-if thoughts. What if this were not happening? What if that were not happening? What could I do? And to some extent, people are addressing the issue of copyright being extinct already. In our workshop yesterday, we talked about this particular point. And one of the observations was that we have Creative Commons licenses. You've all heard of Creative Commons, the little CC. Copyright is a C, Creative Commons is a CC. But with a Creative Commons, if I write a piece of work, a book or an article, and I put a CC on that, it means that any of you can use my work without paying a fee, without dealing with a publisher, but you can use my work as long as you acknowledge who the author of the work is. So you could use words out of my article as long as you say that this particular author, Steve O'Connor, wrote this, and then you can use it fairly freely, without fear of any kind of legal ramifications. If that were the case, then you'd start to think about copyright and you'd start to think about publishing in a very different way. And I'd like to come to that a little bit further. Richard Watson also said that by 2025, desktop computing would be extinct. I don't know. But I could believe that, because virtually everything that I can do or want to do, I can do on this little mobile phone. My only restriction is my eyesight, trying to read it, get it far enough away from me in order to be able to use it. Is spelling obsolete or redundant, extinct? To some extent it is, because my computer will do all the spelling checks for me and often take more mistakes than I make. And to some extent, he advises us that Twitter will be extinct by 2025. Depending on your point of view, that may be a good thing or a bad thing. So, if information were to change, it's worthwhile starting to think about things. And to some extent, what I'm talking about all this morning is asking you to think about things that you don't think about. Because too often we'll go into a library, we'll go into an environment, and we will accept what is there. We will accept the way in which they do their business. But if you were to think about things that you don't think about, then you can start to look at that environment, that business model in a different way. If you can imagine in your mind walking into a library, say 5, 10 years ago, if you were thinking about that in your mind, and then thinking, well, and if I walk into a library today, it is quite different. So 10 years ago, you would have found it very difficult to imagine the kind of library you would find today. It would be very different. But our job today as library managers is to think about our library as to how it should be in 5 or 10 years' time. And that's hard. It really is hard. But that is thinking about things that we're not thinking about at the moment. From the research that I've done over the last 10 years or so, this particular graph I think is worth looking at, in that it is trying to predict the mix of materials coming into the library or into a library system. And what it was predicting on this chart, that over a period of 5 years, that the amount of print material going into a library would decline. The amount of digital material, the material which you pay for through Overdrive or through Elsevier or other electronic publishers, would increase, but only increase marginally. But the area which would increase significantly would be the web material. So a lot more material is becoming available on the web. And the difficulty we've had over the last 2 or 3 years, as evidenced in a lot of the American experience of fake news, is that there has been a lot of material published on the web which isn't authentic. It isn't authoritative. And so that becomes the difficulty. This graph is applicable predominantly for English language materials. But for a number of countries, like Thailand and a number of European countries and other Asian countries, where their own language is not English, then situations will be different. And it's certainly the case in Thailand at the moment that the amount of Thai language material being made available in digital form is slow to increase. So the amount of print material is not declining. It is remaining static. Probably falling a little, but the amount of print material is relatively static. And the digital material is not really increasing yet at all. So that affects your kind of planning. And that's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing. But it is the reality of what is happening. Because the English language material has a better economy of scale, if you like, and so it's cheaper and easier to be able to get that material into digital form. But even in the environment we're talking about for English, it is critical to believe and to recognise that material which has been published in print is not obsolete. It is not obsolete because most of the material, the historical material which has been published in print, will never get into digital form. And so if you wish to access that, you need to really get to a hard copy held by a repository run by libraries somewhere or other. So if we bear that in mind, copyright becomes very important. And if we talk about the situation where we were talking just about a moment ago, that the Creative Commons license is there, and if we've got a Creative Commons license now, that approach is going to grow and it's going to multiply. The Chinese have a word for a crisis, and we have a few crises in the world, don't we? But their word is wei ji, and wei means danger, ji means opportunity. And I always think of that, the ji part of it, because where there is a problem, there's invariably an opportunity. There is invariably a way of thinking about something that you haven't thought about. And so where there is a problem in copyright, enabling a library to do things differently, there is an opportunity in the Creative Commons license to do things differently. Where there is a situation where most of your material is becoming available only in print form, there is an opportunity in a Creative Commons license to be able to digitize some material and make it available. This is already happening to some extent using software, free software like DSpace. You would no doubt be aware of DSpace, where libraries around the world are putting theses of their universities, local histories from the public library communities they are being put into electronic form, digital form, and being made available to their communities on institutional repositories. This is a fantastic development because this material is now being made available by using Creative Commons licenses. And so where in the past the user would have to come along to the library to be able to get hold of that material in hard copy, now they can go to their library, to the institutional repository, and find that material in digital form. They don't need to go to a publisher because the publisher has become the library. The library has become the publisher. We're now thinking about things that we didn't think about before. We are thinking about the library not as a deliverer of information or print information only, but an organisation creating digital content by using this Creative Commons license. It's worthwhile closing your eyes and thinking about that. What are the possibilities for that in a country like Thailand? If you're in Chiang Rai, I really enjoy going to Chiang Rai and visiting Doi Tung, a beautiful part of the world. But I can bring a whole stack of library resources in Thai language using Creative Commons licenses to Doi Tung, to sit in the beautiful gardens there and to be able to use that material legally. So this is what we call the open access environment. And publishers themselves are finding that they are needing to respond to this. It is affecting the way in which they do business. It's affecting the way in which libraries do business. It's affecting the future. And so we need to be thinking of things differently. Because open access is not going away. It's there to stay, and it's going to be a huge impact. So if we start to think about that, then we're starting to think about the way in which libraries will operate. It is there now, but the overall impact across the system will be slow, but it could actually increase. But as in Weiji, the Ji, it is a real opportunity for libraries to think about in terms of your planning. One of the most important things that I think we need as librarians is imagination. Imagination. To be able to imagine things differently. Some people used to think that imagination was only possible through science fiction. But libraries are not science fiction, and the future of libraries are not science fiction. But by using our imagination, we can begin to think of what could be. Not what is, but what could be. And in terms of a planning horizon, I think a lot of people used to do their strategic planning as opposed to their scenario planning, and they would plan for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I can't imagine what a library would be like in 20 years' time. Can you? If you try to think of what a library might be like in 20 years, close your eyes, but turn your mind back. The best way to look at the future is through a rear vision mirror. So if you look in the rear vision mirror by going back 20 years, and so what, it's 2018 now? It's hard to believe, isn't it? But 2018, we go back 20 years. And if you remember where you were in, 1998? Where were you in 1998? What kind of library were you using then? What did the library look like? What kind of services did it provide? And if you imagine yourself in that environment, sitting in that library, and you were in 1998, you would have had some digital material, but it certainly wouldn't have been available across the internet. The internet was nowhere near as pervasive. Would we have had any mobile phones at that stage? We might have had a Nokia phone, which was a pretty much ring, ring, answer it, hang up. That was it. Nothing like what these smartphones are. So that in that 20 years, could you imagine the world, let alone the library, and what changes would have taken place? So I think to plan for 20 years is almost impossible. If you do plan for 20 years, I wish you well. You are very brave, and I look up to you. But it is something that I won't take on. I think a future of 3 years is as far as you can go, perhaps 5. A couple of years ago, would you have imagined that Penguin, a major publisher, who have always said, we want people in our organisation who have university degrees, because we want people in our organisation who are knowledgeable, well-read, smart people. Penguin have just come out and said, we no longer require people with degrees. We still like people with degrees, but we no longer necessarily require them to have degrees. And you think, well, that's really changing the way in which we think about publishing. And then Price Waterhouse. You're all aware of Price Waterhouse as a major accounting consultancy company. They've said the same thing. They no longer require people to have degrees. They like people to have degrees, but they no longer require them to have degrees. And perhaps that is because the rate of change is such that what people learn in a degree is being outpaced by what is happening in our society, by what is happening in the digital environment, by what is happening as we experience the digital world. So Price Waterhouse, Penguin, investment banks are no longer requiring degrees. What is happening with our profession? We still prefer people with degrees. But perhaps we ought to have a look at that question as well. I think we need to think about all different aspects of our profession in order to be able to succeed. These are some issues which I think are worth thinking about. Millennials. Are there any millennials in this room? Are there many millennials in this room? I'm not a millennial. I'm not a Generation X, but I'm a baby boomer. I'm quite happy being a baby boomer. But a baby boomer will approach a library differently to what a Generation X will or what a millennial person will. My sons think I'm crazy. The Chinese have a wonderful word called shen xin bing, which means you're crazy. And if you say shen xin bing, it means you are really crazy. Shen xin bing, oh, you're pretty silly. But a millennial will look at the library, will operate inside a library very differently to what a Generation X or a baby boomer will. A baby boomer might want a quiet space. Millennials are quite happy to have their headphones on, talking away to each other. And so the kind of library which they want will be very different. And so we need to be building that into our plan. Library, the term library, is a very important term, particularly in a world where we have to deal with fake news. I always think that if you want to find out something which is true, which is authoritative, which is authentic, you go to a library. Now, we may be calling some of our libraries different terms, like with the Knowledge Park. But essentially, we draw on the long cultural history of a library. It is trusted. When I was in Hong Kong, I had a library and we had 3,500 study carols in that library. And people would come there because they felt safe. They felt in a good environment, they felt intellectually safe, they felt personally safe. I know of a lot of families who will trust that their children, their young children, can go to a library and be safe. So we need to think about how we use that term and how we deal with it. As library leaders and potential library leaders, the kind of world we're going into requires our skills. And if you haven't heard of the term GLAM, GLAM is very, very important and very important in the future. GLAM stands for galleries, libraries, archives and museums. And certainly in the UK, in Australia, in the US, increasingly, GLAM is seen to be a cultural group. And so managers in libraries are very much in demand because of their ability to be able to plan for the kind of environment, the information environment, and those managers are in demand to work in galleries or archives or museums. Conversely, good managers in those other areas can work across those areas. And so libraries can embrace a much broader role than just what they have in the past. They can embrace roles taking into account galleries, archives and museums. And for the most part, those other organisations, cultural organisations, come in analogue form. But libraries have been the ones who have been leading the digital revolution. They're the ones who've been dealing with how to organise metadata, how to make it available. And certainly I know of many experiences where galleries, archives and museums have been learning from libraries. And so they're interchanging now. If anybody thought that, well, I guess once I would have thought that if I had to come back in another life, I would have come back as a publisher because I would have made a lot more money in my career. Publishers have done very well for themselves. But I think now, you look at publishing. Publishing is being disrupted. Publishers are no longer as secure, no longer as confident about their future, about what they are doing as they were in the past. Why is that? Digital disruption. Digital disruption helped publishers get to where they are, but now with things like the Creative Commons, it is moving, it's providing opportunities for others to confront the business model of the publisher. And publishers know that. And so they're having to think smarter. The last point there was that digital disruption is affecting the library architecture as well. And my colleagues here are talking about that later today. And so the way in which we see libraries, the way in which we build libraries are being affected by digital. And that's a good thing. If you're going to think about disruption, this book by Clayton Christensen is worthwhile thinking about. Basically it has 5 principles in there, but I won't bore you with all 5, although they're all interesting. But I just wanted to talk about 2. One is that companies depend on customers and investors for resources. You think, well, that's for a business environment. That's true. But it's also very important for a library environment. Because if you substitute the word companies and you put libraries in there, if you take away investors and you put administrations, then it reads very differently and it reads very much more relevance to libraries. So libraries depend on their customers. Is that true? I think it is. It's vitally true. And if we forget, if we do not think about our customers, our clients, our users, and if we think that we know everything about libraries, then I think we will end up on the rubbish tip. If we do not think about our investors for resources, if we do not think about the administrations who are providing resources, then again we are going to fail. Because we need our best resource is the users or customers we have. They're the ones who need to be convinced that libraries are doing a good thing. If they think we're doing a good thing, then they will convince the administrators that we are doing a good thing and provide the resources in order to be able to support that further. So your customers and your administration are very, very critical in order to get the resources for doing things into the future. There we go. So there are two more principles there, and number 4 is worthwhile thinking about. An organisation's capabilities define its disabilities. Organisation's capabilities define its disability. What it's good at defines what it's bad at, or what its failings are. I think the obvious example is Kodak, because Kodak's capabilities, Kodak didn't have any failing in its capabilities. It could make cameras, it could make film, it could develop them, it could print them. It could do everything with photography. But because it thought it had everything tied up, sewn up completely, there wasn't any opposition to what they were doing, that became their disability. That became their blind spot. They'd put their blinkers on and the blinkers were getting narrower and narrower. So they couldn't see out to the side. And they were not thinking about things they didn't think about. If we think about what libraries, our capabilities are, then that could become our disability as well. If we think that libraries, the skills are, say, cataloguing, then that could become our disability. Because I think libraries are not so interested in cataloguing anymore. They're interested in metadata. And metadata is the real skill that libraries have passed on to galleries, archives and museums, and how to organise their collections in a digital milieu. If libraries think that reference work is their capability, then Google may be their disability. I mean, how many times do we hear people say, well, I'm going to Google something? Google has become a verb, to Google, rather than anything else. Instead of saying to reference librarian, we say to Google. And it's a very interesting outcome. So what are we going to do about that as librarians? What will become our ability rather than our disability? So I'd like to talk a little bit about business models, because business models is very simply, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is the traditional library business model, where the user, who is an author, provides the material, the intellectual property rights to a publisher, and the librarian provides the dollars or the baht to the publisher, and then the librarian can make that material available to the user. It's been very simple. It's worked very well. It's a circle, and everybody in that circle knows what their relationship to each other is, and therefore it's worked very effectively for a long time. But now, the user has got the opportunity to change, and they're thinking, well, perhaps I can do things differently. Because instead of providing the content to the publisher, the user or the author could provide the content to the library. And then the library can provide that to the user. At the moment, libraries have had one business model, and that is that circle of author, publisher, library, user. Author, publisher, library, user. Publishers, though, have kept that business model, and they've also had another one which says author, publisher, reader, and cutting the library out altogether. Now, it may be that with the Creative Commons license, you can say author, library, reader. But the author can also go directly to the reader. So there are many different ways of looking at that business model now that have not been there before. So it's worthwhile looking at that and seeing how to go, which way you want to go, and how do you think your business model is into the future. Because the opportunity is there for you to change it. And you don't have one business model. You can have two, you can have three. I was the CEO of a company in Melbourne called Caval. And when I went there, we had two business models. We had one which was cataloguing in foreign languages, or languages, many different languages. We could cataloguing in 80 languages. And the other was membership. When I left, we had 5 or 6 business models. And so there were 5 or 6 different businesses that we ran. Libraries still run one. And I think libraries could run many as they want. You can see that I was influenced by my time in Hong Kong. I've learnt enough Chinese to be dangerous rather than effective. So, Wei Lai Tushuguam. Or another one is Wo Ai Tushuguam. Wo is me. I is love. Tushuguam, library. Wo Ai Tushuguam. Wei Lai Tushuguam, the future of the library. And it's a nice way of thinking about it, from my perspective anyway. And so if we're talking about business models, what have publishers done? We've talked about that a little bit already. They've got their business model, the existing traditional business model, but they're also creating other ones. The publishers are creating models where they go directly to the user. They're creating models where they put content directly into online learning systems, again bypassing the library. And so the library's share, if you like, of that kind of business is declining. Banks. Banks have always been seen to be, so solid and so powerful. They've got all my money, or I borrow all the money from them, as the case may be. But there's been recent data that banks, the ATMs, I suppose we all use ATMs, don't we? But recent data is saying there has been a 40% decline in the use of ATMs. And so banks are thinking, oh, gee, should we keep those ATMs out there or not? A 40% decline is very significant. There's also been a 40% decline in the number of people going to a branch, walking into the physical branch of a library. And so the nature of a business for the banks, that's changing very significantly as well. Airlines. If you think that airlines have only one business model, getting people in a plane, sitting them down as tightly as they possibly can, giving you no leg room or anything, that's not true. The most profitable business for most airlines are their frequent flyer programs. So that's another business model which they have. But that is much more profitable for most airlines than is the actual airlines. Education. Education is no longer the face-to-face teaching that we all might have been used to, but online education is very, very important. It's taking over in most cases. Sorry. We've all seen Apple, and I've flashed my Apple. I'm an Apple fan. I've got everything Apple. But Apple are a technology company, aren't they? They make iPhones, iPads, I this, I that. But they're smart as well. Because where their revenue last year was declining, their net profit was declining, the number of iPhones they were producing was declining, iPads, Macs, all declining. the one thing that was increasing, services. So if they've got one business model called technology, the other model is made up of services. Apple have got iTunes. I suppose many people here use iTunes? No? I use iTunes, and a lot of people do, I think. But they're making money out of iTunes, and that's very smart. Apple are also starting to use and market Apple Pay up the top there. And Apple Pay is not only making business much more profitable for Apple, but it's also disrupting the banks in their business model. Because I can take my phone again and I can pay bills with that. And so instead of using a piece of plastic, I can use my phone. So it's smart. And so a lot of companies, a lot of industries are changing their way of thinking, and we need to do that as well as librarians. We used to be the archivist in the print era. We would collect books, we would collect journals, and we would store them. Publishers became the archivist when they went into the digital environment. They were smart too, because not only had they sold us the print book or the print journal, but they resold us the version in digital form. So they've got their money twice. If they sell it in a bundle, they might get the money a third time. So we need to think about that. But we also need to think that if you look at the data coming out now, digital sales are slowing down, and print, again, is increasing in the marketplace. Probably the range of titles is not increasing, but certainly the volume of print is increasing. And what does that mean for us? There is a real role for open access and institutional repositories, and we need to put that in our thinking. And our users are probably some of the most savvy people around, and particularly that young man I put on the screen before. You know, if I need to find out how to use a computer, I don't read a manual. I find a 4-year-old child. They'll know how to use it better than I will. So the library business model, I say that the traditional library business model, that circle, where people came into the physical library to check on the books, that's dead. It's dead, stone dead. So we are in the process of creating new business models. And this is what is exciting. This is the weiji. This is the opportunity that we've got. And we need to be able to do it properly. So what is our business model going to be? And how do we go from there? I think we need to be recognising that we don't have one future, we have many futures. And so when I came into libraries, we had one future, one way of organising things. But we don't have that anymore. We have the opportunity of doing different things. And if we were to look up that path on the screen, it's very hard to see the future. The future is in the sunset at the end there. And we need tools to be able to think about, to gather information about, and to be able to analyse in order to be able to understand what is happening at that particular point in time. The future is, we can make the future our friend. We can make change our friend. The future or change is not an enemy. It's nothing to be feared. It's not easy, but it's not an enemy. We should just make it our friend and go on with it. But in terms of thinking, this is what we need to be doing. There was a company in the States, and they were a chemical engineering company. And so they were dealing with all kinds of problems, very technical problems. And so they employed a lot of PhD students, smart people with chemical engineering backgrounds. But gradually they came to find out that there were a lot of problems that they couldn't solve. So they started a website called Innocentive. And they said on this Innocentive website, this is the problem. We've not been able to solve it. If you can solve it, we'll be very appreciative. We'll give you $25,000. And so a lot of people thought, I'm interested in that. And so they started putting ideas in there. And the solutions started to come, not from the people inside the company who are insiders, but from people outside the company who are outsiders. And so if I talk to you and I say AACR2, there's nobody in the room who would say, I don't know what he's talking about. If I were to, talk about mark records or talk about metadata, everybody knows what I'm talking about because it's the language of the insider. But in order to be able to predict the future or to find the solutions to the future, we need to become outsiders. And the outsiders are the people who are coming in. The outsiders are often our users. Our users have got a really good idea of what they want. Never be afraid of asking them what they think the library ought to be doing. You're not losing authority or power to that group, but rather you are drawing them into the library model and telling them what you think we ought to be doing and hearing what they think. Because we're at a crossroads. And at this confusing intersection, you'd have to stop and think, which direction should I be going? Because I'm told not to go that way, I'm told not to go that way, and where do I go? And that's what we've got as a profession. But that's the real opportunity. That's the fun situation we've got. I can't remember where I took that photograph now. Okay, there we go. When we look at the past, we look back and we think back. We think that the past is a linear path to where we are now. But it isn't. When you sit and analyse it, you might come up the red path to a decision point. We might have gone across to the blue path or to the green or the yellow. And so the path from the past to the present is littered with decisions where we've changed from here to there. And so the future is the same. You can make decisions, you can change what you're doing, but what you need to be doing is to be projecting out. Don't let the future take you along. Don't let those floodwaters at the beginning sweep you along, because you'll never get control. It's a matter of trying to make those decisions, project what the future you want to achieve, and to be able to aim to get there. This image, I think, is always very interesting to me. It reminds me time and time again to avoid same thinking. If everybody in this room thought the same, we would never get anywhere, because we would not be confronting or challenging different ideas, and we need to be able to do that in order to be able to get further. If you look at that image, it's not there, is it? It's over there. What do you see? What is the perception you have of this image? Most people might see one image or see another, but in actual fact, some people will see an old woman, some people will see a young woman. And what that says to me is that perception is the reality. You may see the old woman, you may see the young woman. But in library terms, whatever perception that our users or our administrators have about the library, that is the reality we have to deal with. There's no point saying that, they're wrong. The library is doing this or the library is doing that and it's doing it very well, so don't worry about it. If the perception is that the library is boring, the library is irrelevant, the library doesn't know what it's doing, that is the reality you have to deal with. And that is the reality we are all here today to try and address. Because We need to be thinking about things we don't think about in order to confront that reality and get that reality to the point where people think the library does know what it's doing. The library is the place I want to be. The library is there for the future. I think we need to be thinking like this, that people want what they want when they want it. They don't want something else. They don't want less than what they want, and they certainly don't want it at some other time. If we're able to respond to that, I think we're pretty much getting to where we ought to be. We need to create stories with purpose of what we want to be. We all understand stories into the future. Storytelling is a very good way of communicating what we want to engage with. And remember that we don't need one future. We can create a number. Publishers have more than one future at the moment. They have more than one business model. So should we. So should we. This slide has got in. It's an intruder. But we're in this process, we're dealing with uncertainty. We don't know what the future holds. But there are many tools we can take through scenario planning, through research, which can help us deal with that uncertainty and deal with the risk. So the traits of a successful librarian are, to my way of thinking, curiosity, creativity. Don't be afraid to be creative. And don't think that you are not creative, because most times you are. You're thinking about what you know. View the world as an outsider. View it as a user. If you can get around to the other side of the desk, go outside the library and look in, because you will see it a very different place to what you've known as an insider. Using imagination. Imagination is a very, very powerful tool. And just be persistent. It's like I had the privilege recently of seeing the Corfu Philharmonic Orchestra in practice, in rehearsal. And it just reminded me, as this conductor was dealing with the different sections of this wind orchestra, was how all these different sections of the trumpet, the trombone and the drums and the cymbals, how they all came together. And so we need to be able to bring all those different tools, all those different groups together to make a harmonious tune. Otherwise, it will be discordant. So leadership, I think, in this process is very, very important. And, you can be that leader. I ran a program in Hong Kong called Next Gen, the next generation of leaders. And they're the ones who need new skills in order to be able to guide us to the future. The final point that I'd just like to raise is that I think the best fight, or the worst fight that libraries have ever won as a profession, is that libraries are free. Libraries, we've convinced the world that libraries should have free access, but libraries are anything but free to operate. They are expensive, and therefore we need to be able to justify them. We need to be able to demonstrate to people what the future of those libraries is potentially, and to engage our users, engage our administrators in what that future might be. I think I've talked enough, and I certainly like to thank you very much for your attention, and hoop and carp. Hoop and carp.
ขอบคุณค่ะ and คุณสตีฟครับ please remain on the stage as we have the Q&A section too ตอนนี้เป็นช่วง Q&A นะคะท่านไหนมีคำถามยกมือถามคุณสตีฟได้เลยนะคะไม่ต้องเกรงใจนะคะจะมีเจ้าหน้าที่เนี่ยวิ่งไมค์ไปให้กับทุกท่านด้วยค่ะ I have one thing before you ask some questions I have one thing to tell you just to tell you 我也爱图书馆อันนี้แบมบอกคุยเล่นกับเขานะคะแต่เมื่อสักครู่นี้เนี่ยเขาพูดว่า我爱图书馆เป็นภาษาจีนค่ะแปลว่าฉันรักห้องสมุดนะคะมันก็เลยแซวเขาเล่นว่าฉันก็รักห้องสมุดเช่นเดียวกันนะคะ我也爱图书馆ค่ะซึ่งเป็นความจริงนะคะ it's true not just kidding 我也爱图书馆 มีท่านไหนมี
อุ๊ย
คำถามไหมคะ มีไหมคะ อันนี้เป็นเรื่องราวที่เชื่อว่าทุกท่านคงทราบกันพอประมาณอยู่แล้วว่าสมัยปัจจุบันนี้เนี่ยเราเป็นช่วงของ disruptive time เป็นช่วงเวลาที่เรียกว่าเทคโนโลยีต่างๆเนี่ยเข้ามาเยอะเลยนะคะและคราวนี้เนี่ยสิ่งที่คุณสตีฟอยากจะบอกทุกท่านก็คือห้องสมุดของเราเนี่ยต้องมีการปรับตัวในการให้บริการด้วยอย่างที่บอกไปเมื่อสักครู่นี้หลากหลายอย่างเลยนะคะอย่างเช่นเรื่องของความกระตือรือร้นนะคะความอยากรู้อยากเห็นนะคะแล้วก็ใส่ใจโดยที่มองจากมุมมองของผู้ใช้บริการภายนอกว่าณเวลานั้นเนี่ยเขาต้องการอะไรนั่นเองนะคะก็อันนี้เป็นไอเดียพื้นฐานเดี๋ยวเรามาดูกันต่อในหัวข้อถัดไปนะคะแต่ว่าตอนนี้เชื่อว่าทุกท่านไม่มีท่านไหนมีคำถามใช่ไหมคะถ้ามีสามารถที่จะถามคุณสตีฟภายหลังได้นะคะโอเคค่ะขอบคุณนะคะ big round of applause for คุณสตีฟค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you very much.
thank you ขอบคุณค่ะละค่ะเดี๋ยวเราไปพักเบรกกันเดี๋ยวก่อนเบรกขออนุญาตค่ะขออภัยวันนี้นี่นะคะเราได้รับเกียรติจากศิลปินค่ะท่านนี้มีความสามารถพิเศษในการวาดภาพเพื่อสรุปการบรรยายในหัวข้อแต่ละหัวข้อซึ่งวันนี้ท่านจะวาดให้เราทุกหัวข้อเลยเดี๋ยวเราไปชมกันนะคะเดี๋ยวจะขึ้นบนหน้าจอค่ะนะคะโดยศิลปินท่านนี้อยู่ทางด้านนี้นี่เองนะคะขออนุญาตแนะนำนะคะนี่คือคุณตุลเล็กอุทัยค่ะท่านเป็น Visual Storyteller ค่ะนี่แหละค่ะคือศิลปินผู้มากความสามารถนะคะแล้วก็ที่เห็นบนจอขณะนี้ก็คือภาพวาดสรุปการบรรยายของคุณสตีฟ โอคอนเนอร์ค่ะ